In this image of the cross-section of carbon fibers, we want to count the number of fibers and measure their cross-section area. This image looks considerably more complex than the previous one that we were looking at because there are many more objects. The objects being namely fiber damages in the field of view. And even more complex, they're touching each other, so it is more difficult to count them individually. Again, the image analysis can be used to overcome these problems. We start by setting the thresholders as we did previously. As shown before, you can select the threshold. You can adjust it manually, or more accurately, you can simply click the Auto button, and that sets the threshold that estimates the correct level to use. The next thing we need to do is to set a processing filter for this image, which will separate the fibers. You can see in this case where we have the fibers. You can also see that these fibers are joined together, so they can't be counted individually. So let's look at the step that will help us to separate these. You can see that under this processing step, I have selected a separation mode called Cut Touching. This is being automatically applied. The images are now turned green to show that this represents the process image. So we've cut the objects, and if we zoom in, you can clearly see that the lines have been drawn between these objects that were previously touching. This means we will now be able to count these. So if I select the count operation under Measurements, you will see that instantly we've counted over 1,000 fibers. You can actually see we counted 1,066. Of course, when you have this many objects in the field of view, it is very complex to understand the details. All of the details are presented in this table. And we also present the averages, so we get the means of standard deviation of all the measurements that we made here. More interestingly, would be put all that information into one graphical form. We now select the histogram mode to show the objects in the color according to their size. To see that in detail, we can switch on the histogram, and you can now see that we have got a count of the number of fibers against the cross-sectional area. You can also see the link between the color and the histogram and the color on the image. Again, if you want to look at these in more detail, we now have the numbers positioned on the fibers, so when we zoom in, we can pick out individual fibers if we want to extract further information from these. Of course, once we have set up this process by setting each step in the processing sequence, I can now save that as a configuration. So if I have other similar images in the future, I simply have to recall my configuration, and it will run through all those steps, producing the appropriate histogram based on the measurements that have been made. As you can see, we can adapt this image analysis operation to counting hundreds of objects almost instantly, while producing a summary of the data from them.